So 3 to 12 hours, November 3, 1984, Vypolzovo Strategic Missile Base, northwest of Moscow. Major Alexander Lisovsky stood over a steel console in Silo 6, finishing his third cup of black tea. The night shift was uneventful. The sky outside silent, buried beneath frost, inside the control bunker. A dull hum filled the concrete room machines in passive readiness, awaiting the unthinkable. Then the silence broke. A piercing alarm shrieked. Red floodlights ignited. On the console, the alert screen flashed. Command alert red status strategic initiation. Lisovsky froze. This wasn't a drill. No preliminary warning. No HQ order. Yet the system now displayed a full strike posture alert, a level reserved for verified incoming ICBM attacks. He slammed the intercom. Control, verify origin of alert code. No answer. 3 more consoles came alive. Each confirmed command-level alert. Launch posture authorized, awaiting final key input. Crews raced down the corridor, unlocking safety cases, unlocking dual-key switches. Lisovsky's second-in-command turned pale. Moscow's silent. Orders aren't coming. Do we arm the missiles in the next 30 seconds? The base would reach full readiness. Missile doors prepared to open. Warheads aligned to pre-programmed U.S. targets. There was no confirmation. No enemy detected. No radar signal. Just a single command, one ghostly signal flickering through the launch network. Lisovsky hesitated. He ordered a hold. No key turn. 3 minutes passed. Nothing from Moscow. Then another tone. Alert lifted code error signal duplication. The room went silent. Keys still in hand, missiles still cold. The screen returned to standby. Later, command would call it a minor relay malfunction, but the crews knew what had just happened. They had been 3 steps from global war, and no one knew why. Deep beneath Moscow, the Soviet General Staff's underground war room thrived on one principle: precision equals control. A command hierarchy rooted in physics, mathematics, and absolute trust in the machine. Walls lined with display panels showed real-time feeds from over 300 missile silos, radar arrays, and satellite uplinks. Dozens of officers stood ready to verify, authorize, and execute retaliatory protocols should the West dare to strike. The entire structure was built on the belief that no false signal could ever breach the system. When briefed about the Vypolzovo incident, senior commanders responded with disbelief, then dismissal. Quote, 1. A colonel snapped command alerts do not self-activate. This is operator error. Quote, Number 2. An engineer added, launch protocols are layered. False triggers are statistically impossible. Quote, Number 3. A political officer warned, this narrative undermines public faith. Don't exaggerate a flicker. This room believed in certainty. Every process was layered with fail-safes, dual-key ignition systems, coded message authentication, tiered signal propagation through hardened cables. Credential drop was one. War I, Marshal Viktor Chebrikov. Then KGB head, personally oversaw the installation of the Alert Integrity Verification Chain AIVC, designed to prevent exactly this kind of anomaly. And yet, in the early hours of November 3rd, a launch-level alert had reached frontline silos without Moscow's consent. Dramatic irony. They were certain that mistakes were impossible. They were wrong. They believed loyalty meant speed, not scrutiny. They believed procedures would override fear. But that night, the procedure became the threat. And the officers in this room, so confident in their systems, were suddenly haunted by a question they couldn't answer. What else have we trusted that might betray us rather than accept the failure? They doubled down on control. They demanded an internal memo, a one-line response, a closed file, confirmed malfunction, no further action required. But certainty was already broken, not with an explosion. but with silence and a signal that never should have existed. The Soviet strategic doctrine in the early 1980s was engineered for absolute execution. In the event of an American first strike, the Soviet response had to be not only immediate, but mathematically guaranteed. The architecture of deterrence depended on this no hesitation, no ambiguity, no room for error or interpretation. To achieve this, the Soviet Union designed a web of interconnected systems. OCO early warning satellites monitored infrared signatures from U.S. missile fields. Daryl and Dnieper ground-based radars tracked trajectories from multiple angles. Centralized command protocols relayed alerts directly from high command to field units via hardened lines. Most critically, once a verified alert was received, units were authorized to prepare launch automatically without awaiting confirmation of impact. Why? Because Soviet planners believed NATO's first strike doctrine aimed to decapitate leadership within minutes. There would be no time for discussion, no time to confirm. A system that hesitated would be a system that died. Quote from 1982, Doctrine Manual: Strike back before your voice is silenced. To preserve readiness, the launch alert system was treated as inviolable. Each signal was digitally signed, encoded, and confirmed by checksum. Failsafes were mechanical and human, but not designed to challenge alerts, only to verify completion. Credential drop, Fotursinu. Colonel General Vladimir Govorov, head of the Strategic Rocket Forces, wrote, "Our command chains are flawless. We do not alert by accident. We strike when warned." The system was trusted because it appeared invulnerable. Every test, every audit, every wargame confirmed that no single glitch could initiate a false command. But what happened at Vypolzovo challenged that to the core. There had been no radar track, no satellite confirmation, no enemy action. And yet, the system had moved. Crews received what appeared to be a legitimate top-level launch readiness signal. The doctrine, once seen as robust, now looked brittle, fatal assumption. That alert codes could only come from the top. That no echo, no loop, no line fault could replicate the signature of war. That belief nearly shattered reality, because the system wasn't questioned. And in that silence, it came one signal away from catastrophe. 3-12. Red status flickered on Launch Console 1 at Vypolzovo. 0313. Warning buzzers activated. Code string identified Class 4 Strategic Command Alert 031322. Major Lisovsky ordered Readiness Posture 2 crew to immediate stations. 0314. Silo 2 and Silo 4 confirmed launch posture. 031445. Backup system reported identical alert code duplicated. 0315. Missiles were now 3 steps from ignition. 0316. No message from Moscow, no radar input. 0317. Silence. 0318. A technician whispered, "This can't be real." 0319. Communication with command post re-established. They denied issuing the alert. 0320. General Staff requested a status freeze. 0321. Alert code lifted. 0322. Reason duplicate transmission echo within relay node. The room didn't exhale. It trembled. The signals had all matched headers. Security checksum. Encryption. But the origin didn't exist. Somewhere inside the hardened command architecture, a ghost signal had been born. Credential drop. To 3. A classified internal audit noted command verification bypassed by echo. Protocol alignment simulated a legitimate signal. This wasn't just a technical hiccup. It was a system-level hallucination that activated nuclear readiness without cause, without enemy, without warning. And Vypolzovo wasn't alone. Cross-checks at Tatishchevo and Kozelsk revealed they too had briefly entered readiness posture, triggered by the same sequence, then dismissed it as a glitch. At least 2 other bases had seen the signal. Only Vypolzovo responded by the book. The response protocol had worked. That was the problem. What began as cold code turned into cold sweat across the strategic rocket forces. The system had obeyed perfectly. too perfectly. It did not ask. It did not doubt. It only moved. And had Lisovsky followed his final order key turn, the missiles would have launched. With no enemy in the sky, no threat in the air, no confirmation from Moscow, just a phantom line of code, echoing through an unbreakable chain. The first crack had appeared. Not in the concrete of a silo, but in the assumption that the machine knew what war looked like. The moment the incident reached high command, the bureaucratic reflex activated. A rapid response inquiry team, composed of senior officers from the Strategic Rocket Forces and the Ministry of Communications, was dispatched not to investigate, but to control the narrative. The initial briefing in the General Staff War Room lasted just 12 minutes. General Kuznetsov's conclusion operational protocol was followed. No deviation, no damage, case closed. Quote, Number 1, we train for discipline, not doubt. Quote, Number 2 field units acted as instructed. The system held end of discussion. Quote, Number 3, there is no flaw, only misinterpretation. Credential drop. Number 4, a memo from the Central Committee's Defense Secretariat declared incident logged as benign relay echo. Further investigation unnecessary. To the field officers who lived through it. This was madness. They had stood one key turn away from apocalypse. Yet Moscow's answer was denial. No pause, no redesign, just reassurance, layered in silence. Blame, where necessary, was gently applied to local command centers. Lisovsky received an informal reprimand, not for what he did, but for filing the incident in precise detail. His report was labeled overly speculative. His final paragraph urging technical review was redacted. The silos at Tatishchevo, which also received the ghost signal, were never debriefed. The incident became a non-event, removed from future training materials. No mention in command readiness reviews. No updates to launch signal protocols. Why? Because Soviet military political doctrine demanded the illusion of invulnerability. To admit the system could create its own false war signal was to admit structural weakness, a concept ideologically forbidden. Ideology over inquiry, control over clarity. This was not new. The same instinct buried earlier crises. In 1979, when a NORAD training tape triggered U.S. alert, American officers initiated reforms. In 1983, when Petrov defied the OCO alert, the Soviets buried it. Now, in 1984, the cycle repeated. The doctrine could not be wrong. Only the men could. And so, a near-miss event that should have shaken the foundations of Soviet strategic confidence became a ghost unspoken, unlearned, and ultimately unprepared for when it would happen again. In the weeks that followed the Vypolzovo near launch, Soviet engineers scrambled to fabricate a cause not to solve the issue, but to restore the illusion of control. The official technical explanation proposed was atmospheric signal bounce due to an unshielded junction point in a northern relay station. A spike in electromagnetic interference, they claimed, caused the original message to duplicate and loop, resulting in the retransmission of a previously archived alert signal. On paper, it looked plausible. Signal bounce was a known phenomenon in civilian telecommunication systems, especially in stormy weather or solar flare conditions. To the engineers at the Ministry of Communications, it offered a convenient technical out. Quote from internal report, signal corruption likely. Static echo cannot breach primary protocol, but redundancy codes may align under rare solar load. It sounded scientific. It sounded controlled. It sounded like progress. Action taken. New shielding materials ordered for 6 key transmission nodes. Environmental dampeners installed at vulnerable relays. Local power grids instructed to increase grounding standards. Credential drop for 5. A 1985 infrastructure bulletin read, signal integrity improved by 16% following anti-static protocol deployment. But beneath the surface, technicians knew the fix was cosmetic. Flaw number 1. There had been no solar flare on November 3, 1984, No atmospheric anomaly. Weather logs confirmed stable conditions. Flaw number 2. The signal had perfectly matched authentication codes, something no bounce or corruption could fabricate. Flaw number 3. The exact same duplicate message had appeared in multiple regions on separate, isolated systems. Atmospheric bounce couldn't account for that. Still, the Soviet command accepted the theory, not because it explained what happened, but because it allowed them to stop asking. It was a narrative with wires, a patch for protocol, a placebo for fear. By declaring the anomaly as contained static, the High Command protected doctrine. The system worked. The fault was environmental. The fix was deployed. No further questions. No further answers. And so, the ghost remained in the machine untouched, unnamed, and quietly waiting. Even as engineers sealed their reports with electromagnetic theories and environmental scapegoats, another explanation began to take root, one born not from science, but from suspicion. Within the GRU and elements of the KGB, a competing theory emerged: enemy action. They called it active maskirovka, a proposed NATO test of signal infiltration using low-frequency spoofing or deliberate code injection. In short, the Americans had simulated a command signal to see if Soviet systems would respond. Quote from GRU briefing: "The West no longer tests missiles. They test our nerves. According to this theory, the false alert was not a system malfunction, but a deliberate provocation, a cyber operation using compromised satellites or comm nodes to trigger an internal response." The logic was appealing. It shifted blame from domestic flaws to foreign manipulation. It justified investment in electronic warfare countermeasures. It reinforced the Cold War belief that the enemy was everywhere, even inside the wires. Response measures launched. GRU authorized a full audit of ground signal relays for foreign taps. KGB launched background checks on communication technicians at 3 relay hubs. Defense Ministry explored hardening protocols to block signal mimicry. Credential drop, December 6. A December 1984. GRU memorandum warned unconventional threats must be anticipated. The enemy may now wage war via silence and simulation, but the theory was deeply flawed. Flaw number 1. No intercepted NATO communications showed any unusual activity that night. Flaw number 2. No Western missile alerts, troop movements, or readiness escalations were observed, nothing to suggest a test or drill. Flaw number 3. There was no physical evidence of code injection or foreign interference. It was a phantom enemy, invented to defend a doctrine that could not admit internal error. Worse, it divided the investigative community. Some believed the system had glitched, others believed it had been attacked. Neither side asked the deeper question: why did the system allow it to happen, instead of converging on truth? Soviet institutions fractured around competing false narratives, static echoes versus Western sabotage. 2 myths. Both wrong, both powerful, because both protected the core assumption the machine is flawless. And if that's true, then the danger didn't come from failure. It came from reality refusing to match expectation. When the alert code was triggered on November 3rd, the expectation was clear record everything, analyze everything, isolate the cause. But inside the Soviet intelligence and military technical complex, what followed was not illumination, it was opacity. The GRU, KGB, and Ministry of Defense launched a joint review, codenamed Operation Prism. Its mission was simple: find the signal origin, confirm system integrity, and eliminate risk of recurrence. It failed. Failure number 1. Data loss. The core transmission logs from the signal relay stations had already been overwritten. Due to memory constraints, standard policy was to purge alert line data every 72 hours, unless flagged. The Vypolzovo alert, dismissed as benign, was never flagged. Failure number 2. Telemetry, fragmentation, OCO satellite logs critical for verifying whether any infrared signature was present were stored across multiple archives. None synchronized. Satellite 7's logs were complete. Satellite 9's archive was missing. Satellite 6 had been in diagnostic mode that night and recorded no data at all. Failure. Number 3. No unified protocol. Each branch of the investigation operated in isolation. The GRU studied interception possibilities. The KGB investigated internal sabotage. The strategic rocket forces focused on hardware faults. No coordination. No integration. Credential drop 7. A 1985 classified KGB internal memo stated each agency saw a piece. No one saw the whole. They gathered data, but they couldn't make sense of it. At one point, the GRU requested access to classified comms pathways from the Ministry of Communications to test for code bleed. The request was denied on grounds of compartmentalization. Meanwhile, missile unit logs from 2 other bases that received the same phantom signal were missing entirely. Field officers were later told they had erased them in error. Quote, from GRU analyst, we recorded the moment perfectly, and then we erased it. They had built a surveillance state of immense power intercepting NATO frequencies, tracking U.S. submarines, decrypting microwave traffic across the Atlantic. But the moment the threat came from within, the system blinked. No one could say where the signal came from. No one could say how it passed authentication. No one could stop it. The final report from Operation Prism was 42 pages long. It ended with one sentence: no fault confirmed, no revision recommended, risk negligible, credential drop. That report was signed by a deputy minister. The analysts who wrote it never saw it again. This was not intelligence. It was blindness dressed as analysis. A blackout not caused by power loss but by fear of truth. While the Soviet Union struggled to explain a phantom launch alert, the United States had already accepted a painful truth: their own systems weren't perfect either. But unlike the Soviets, they didn't hide from it. They redesigned everything around one principle: you cannot automate Armageddon. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. suffered its own false alerts, but each became a case study, a reason to add layers, logic, and most importantly, human veto power. Technology 1, DSP Satellites Defense Support Program, Soviet Expectation, 1 Infrared Detection, RUC-1 Verified Launch. American Reality Infrared only starts the alert chain, never ends it. Why it worked. Multiple DSP satellites covered overlapping fields. One false flare couldn't trigger a launch. Combat example. In 1979, a training tape accidentally mimicking a nuclear attack triggered alerts at NORAD. DSP saw no launches alert canceled, no weapons armed. Technology 2, BMEWS ballistic missile. Early warning system Soviet expectation radar confirms attack launch immediately. American Reality BMEW's data is routed through NORAD and STRATCOM, cross-checked with DSP and intelligence assets. Why it worked. Multi-tier review process prevents isolated data from triggering action. Combat example. In 1980, BMEW's radar falsely detected 200 inbound missiles due to a faulty chip. Command held position until all cross-checks failed to confirm. Stand-down issued. Technology 3. Two-person control. Presidential authorization. Soviet expectation launch approval resides in military command. Political leaders act only if time allows. American Reality. The president must authorize any nuclear use, with military personnel executing orders only under strict verification. Why it worked. Political oversight prevents military reflex. Combat example. During the 1983 Able Archer NATO exercise, despite heightened tension, U.S. nuclear forces remained on normal posture, civilian control held firm. Technology 4. Multiple confirmation chains. Soviet expectation. A single line of signal is sufficient if it authenticates. American Reality warnings must be confirmed via 3 separate systems: satellite, radar, intelligence, Why it worked. Redundancy over speed reduces risk of false positives. Combat example. During a 1985 alert triggered by a sensor anomaly, the U.S. command post received conflicting data response delayed until threat invalidated. Technology 5. Data preservation and forensics. Soviet expectation. Temporary logging data overwritten in days unless flagged. American reality, all alerts archived, cross-referenced, and audited post-incident. Why it worked. Transparency enables system improvement. Combat example. Every false alert from 1979 to 1983 led to internal reforms, procedural, technical, and cultural. Credential drop, number 9. In 1986, a U.S. Stratcom report stated, "We assume every alert is false until confirmed, not true until disproven." Progressive scoring. Soviet 1 signal, Doximtworst full alert. American 1 signals, Tasher inquiry. Soviet automation, hesitation. American hesitation, extinction. Soviet silence, concealed flaws. American failure, redesigned systems. Where the Soviet system was brittle under the weight of certainty, the American system grew stronger by absorbing failure. They didn't eliminate human error, they embraced human judgment. In 1984, the Soviet Union nearly launched because it trusted the machine. By that same year, the United States had already reprogrammed its machines to defer to doubt. 0312. Alert signal activates at Vypolzovo. 0313. Missiles enter launch posture. 0314. Crews prepare keys. 0315. No order from Moscow. 0316. Silence. 0317. Echo detected in relay node. 0318. Code verified falsely. 0319. Alert lifted. 0321. Silence again. The entire system designed for certainty had just rehearsed its own end, not from enemy missiles, not from espionage, but from within. The doctrine had functioned flawlessly. That was the problem. The Soviet strategic response system had been designed to automate Armageddon, assuming threat clarity would always precede action. But in this case, action preceded threat, and no one could explain why. Progressive collapse. 1 signal reached multiple bases. 3 bases entered readiness. 0 confirmations from radar or OCO. 14 crews held keys in ready posture. 1 commander chose to hesitate. The incident was never made public. No foreign intelligence community learned of it. It was buried under layers of classified paperwork, sealed under national security directives. Quote from senior staff report, "The system performed within parameters. No protocol deviation occurred." That phrase became the unofficial epitaph for Soviet confidence. Credential drop Nodshur 10 Lisovsky. The officer who held his fire was transferred 6 months later, not promoted, not punished, just moved quietly. No medals, no inquiry, just silence. Full reversals from Section 2. They said the system cannot activate without command. They stopped saying that when it did. They said false alerts are impossible. They stopped saying that after crews prepped for launch without a war. They said doctrine defends peace through readiness. They stopped saying that when readiness almost triggered war by mistake. This was not a near miss from miscalculation. This was a machine, built to think without thinking, running a perfect simulation of the apocalypse without reason. There was no button pressed, no enemy engaged, no countdown initiated. But for 9 minutes, the Soviet Union's most powerful weapons were ready to launch at ghosts. And in that silence, something broke not in the hardware, but in the belief that precision equals peace. They didn't stop the system. They just prayed it wouldn't happen again. When Soviet analysts revisited the Vypolzovo incident months later, quietly, unofficially, away from doctrine, they began to see it not as an isolated failure, but as a symptom of a deeper structural illusion. What they uncovered wasn't a glitch, it was a worldview collapsing. Revelation number 1. Information versus mass. Soviet systems prioritized mass deployment, more silos, more missiles, more alerts over the quality and coherence of information. The system didn't ask why a signal appeared. It only responded that one had. Paraphrased, quote from internal analysis, mass protects borders, but it doesn't protect the truth. Revelation 2. Precision versus quantity. The alert system responded precisely to a meaningless signal. The command chain assumed quantity of alerts confirmed reality, but perfect response to false data only magnified the error. As one officer wrote, "We hit the wrong note, flawlessly." Revelation 3. Computing versus judgment. Soviet doctrine sought to remove hesitation by removing human judgment. Computers were trusted more than commanders. But when the system blinked, it was a human, not a code, that stopped the war. Another analyst noted, "A machine doesn't doubt. That's not strength, it's suicide." Revelation 4. Systems versus objects. The USSR designed powerful weapons missiles, silos, radars, but each functioned in isolation. The Americans had designed systems, where confirmation came not from one source, but many. Soviet design worshipped the object. American design valued the relationship between them. Credential drop doctrine, Ulwathor 11. A 1987 classified systems report concluded, "Our architecture reacts. Theirs questions." This moment, this false signal that nearly triggered a global exchange, was not caused by one wire, one relay, one man. It was the result of a structure that demanded obedience to systems it didn't fully understand. And at its center, the most dangerous assumption of all: that war could be controlled if the buttons were guarded. But it wasn't the button, it was the logic behind it. A system built to move fast without pause, designed to trust its own reflection in the digital mirror, had finally looked inward and saw a ghost. The lesson: you don't defeat error by denying it. You defeat it by building a world where error can be seen, slowed, and stopped. The Soviets built a sword of logic, and it nearly fell on them. In a sealed archive beneath the Ministry of Defense, there's a worn launch checklist from Silo 6 at Vypolzovo. It bears a red smudge across line 14, execute launch key turn, never completed. Beside it, the alert signal printout timestamp 0312-07 November 3, 1984. Destination Strategic Rocket Forces, Western Command, status authentic, verified, execute. The paper is silent. The ink hasn't faded. But what it almost triggered could have darkened continents. That signal was not just a command. It was proof that the system, built to be unquestionable, had no way to question itself. It was not sent by an officer, not ordered by a general, not verified by leadership. It was born inside the machine, passed through lines, echoed without challenge, and obeyed. The launch key was not turned, not because the system stopped it, because one man stared at the blinking red and chose hesitation over perfection. He never received commendation. His decision is still classified, and yet that pause, that second of human doubt, may have saved millions. The alert code was not just a glitch, it was a mirror held up to a doctrine that equated silence with safety, speed with security, control with certainty. But certainty killed nothing that night. It nearly killed everything. In the end, there was no missile, no explosion, no fallout, only a warning from a ghost. Final image, a launch key, untouched. Red light blinking softly in a bunker no one remembers. It was not just a false alarm. It was a question the Soviet Union could not answer. Final line. The Cold War wasn't nearly ended by a missile. It was nearly ended by a machine that couldn't ask why.